My name is Pierre Sané. I am a member of the board of the Global Compact, and I am the co-chair of the Human Rights Working Group of the Global Compact. The session this afternoon will last until 3:50. We must stop at 3:50 because there is a session starting at 4 p.m. So we hope that we'll still be able to have rich interaction, but the shorter those interaction, the better. Now, I am told that participants who want to take the floor must register on a list on the table there, and only those who have registered will be given the floor, if time permits, to everybody, but to as many as possible, trying to balance interventions from government representatives, business, civil society organizations. Now, what we want to do this afternoon is what we do at Global Compact, which is sharing experiences. We want to share experiences because we know that business, human rights organizations, and other civil society groups, governments, operate in different contexts when it comes to implementation of human rights principles and standards, conventions. The environment is different. We know that the familiarity of the business community when it comes to human rights and when it comes to business and human rights will be different from one type of industry to another, will be different from one country to another, will be different from one region of the world to another. And we also know that the engagement of civil society organizations when it comes to business and human rights will be different from one region to the next. But at the same time, we have guiding principles which are supposed to be universal and which are supposed to be implemented in all contexts, irrespective of the experience or even the willingness of the different actors. So in order to discuss challenges and obstacles, but also opportunities to the implementation of the guiding principles, we have put together a panel from, I believe, all the regions of the world, and the panel is actually adequately gender balanced. So I think that we are politically, in UN term, correct. So we have on the panel to accompany us, introduce the discussion, and open the discussion later to the audience. We have Mrs. Kovolan, who is Social Responsibility Manager of Itaipu, the Itaipu Binational Hydroelectric Power Plant. And she's also the Vice President of the Global Compact Local Network in Brazil. And binational means it is Brazil and Paraguay. Brazil and Paraguay. Okay, so she will share with us some experiences in the challenges to implement the set of principles, share with us some state of the art of business and human rights in Brazil. Is it a priority for the government? Is it priority for companies? Is it a priority for the human rights NGOs? We have Mrs. Slavejkova. She is Human Resource Manager of Titan Group, and she is from Fir, Macedonia. She is also going to share her experience on the same issues, the challenges, the obstacles, the opportunities, hopes, expectations, so that we can look at what is happening in Brazil, and we can look at what is happening in Eastern Europe. The two ladies will be followed by Mr. Williams, Rajeev Williams, because if I don't say Rajeev, we may think you are from another part of the planet. You are from India. Rajeev is the corporate head of CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility, from Jindal Stainless Limited, which is manufacturing plant active in India, but also in Indonesia. And you have recent experience of engaging with the communities around your plant. So that experience will be of interest to all of us here. Mr. Mwangonde is from Malawi. He wears many, many hats. He's Executive Director of Citizens for Justice, Friends of the Earth Malawi, Mining Watch Malawi. He also coordinates the extractive industry campaigns for the International Alliance for Natural Resources in Africa. He is the coordinator of Resisting Mining Oil and Gas for the Africa region and the coordinator of the African Uranium Alliance. That's a lot. But he will tell us how he is addressing all the challenges and obstacles of bringing companies in Africa, especially mining companies, to respect the rights of the communities, to respect the rights of the workers, and to address issues of corruption. Not to mention environmental protection, another pillar of corporate social responsibility. And then, last but not least, let's go to China. Mr. Keiming is the founding chairperson and executive director of the Institute for Contemporary Observation. It's based in Shenzhen, and this is a civil think tank and action group committed to defend labor rights and promote social justice in China. That's a very tall order, but you will explain to us how successful you are. Then after the panelists, we will have 3 respondents. One is my colleague Gwendoline Remert. Gwendoline is from Germany, and she is the coordinator of the local network of the Global Compact, which is one of the oldest local network in the world at the local level. It was founded already in 2001. And then Mrs. Wright, Catherine Wright, she's program manager, Global Business Initiative on human rights. And then finally, we will also have an intervention by Margaret Jonk. She is from the UN Human Rights Working Group. She was previously with Global Compact Human Rights Working Group. Is that correct? You still are? Okay, all right. So she will bring the message of the working group on the challenges that we would have heard from the panelists in taking the guiding principles forward. Okay, so we will start immediately with Mrs. Kolovan, but please do register if you want to ask a question. I would even propose that even if you don't want to ask a question, you register just in case you change your mind. Because if it is the other way around, you won't be able to speak. So register and then you can decline to speak. Okay, so you have 5 to 7 minutes. Kolovan, sorry. You.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I ask your license more. Are you hearing me? Well, I will try to speak aloud. I will read my remarks, and I promise I will be quick. In Brazil, the human rights agenda has been started in the late 90s with the propagation of global compact human rights principles that helped companies arouse their attention to the topic. The creation of the guiding principles is a great progress. They point, in a didactical way, facts that governments, companies, and society must respect without any restriction. In Brazil, they are landing, but very slowly, through the institutions that work on human rights and experts. Last March, the Brazilian NGO Conectas, specialized on human rights, published the guide principles translated into Portuguese, helping very much their propagation. Despite of this, we still have a long way to go. I believe that companies in Brazil still have many doubts about the plurality of topics covered by the human rights, and therefore have not adopted yet consciously human rights as a priority to guide their businesses. In general, they only recognize those human rights related to work, even though many of them are fighting slavery and child labor in the supply chain, opening more space to blacks, to people with disabilities, and to women in activities that are culturally for male. Companies have not yet been able to identify how they could make a more precise diagnosis on their actions or omissions on human rights related, or for instance, to community around them. For those companies which already work on human rights, the guiding principles contribute to better organize their current initiatives, identify gaps, and indicate new perspectives of action. They can contribute that the board takes the topic to different departments, encouraging workers to have an easy access to human rights issues and incorporate them to a daily basis. For companies which are starting to work on this, the guiding principles point the path to be followed to identify the roles and organize the work. To my mind, the biggest challenge is to turn the guiding principles worldwide familiar by all segments of society, making this an agenda for business, governments, universities, and, why not, rewriting them in an educational form for children and young people at schools. As a delegate of Global Compact Brazilian Network, I believe we must to increase this dialogue intensively, promoting events for sensibilization and capaciting people on them. The Brazilian government agenda on human rights brings fighting children, sexual exploitation, and violence against women, children's rights to education, and the right to acceptable conditions in prison. The government also has created opportunity granted by law for a bigger access to university and to labor market for people with disability, blacks, young, and women. Recently, President Dilma Rousseff has launched the Truth Commission, composed by experts. This Truth Commission is traveling all the country, hearing people and searching for data about the crimes committed during the military dictatorship occurred between the 40s and 80s. It is a great step in the respect to human rights that we Brazilians were waiting for a long time. Turning to the business, in my opinion, companies need to qualify the demand and keep a permanent dialogue with different stakeholders, including those with conflicting interests. To sum up, the big challenge is to see the respect to the human rights as intrinsic to the management, not as a plus to it. Thank you. very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll come back probably to this presentation because of some interesting things that have been raised in the case of Brazil. Let us now move to Macedonia, FIR Macedonia, with Mrs. Slaveshkova.
It's okay. Good afternoon to everyone. First, I must say that it is a great honor to be here and to have the opportunity to discuss, to share, and to contribute to such a noble cause as the human rights. I will speak from business aspect, of course, from cement industry, which my company is. Our mother company, Titan Group, in fact, is a multinational company. I will speak for the region, Southeast European, so because also Titan has plants not only in Macedonia, it has in Serbia, Albania, Kosovo, Greece, and Bulgaria. So all our CSR efforts and efforts toward disseminating or embedding the human rights into the region practically affect all this country as effort to the group company and to all of its subsidiaries to make some progress in this area. Now, regarding the guiding principles on human rights, we have been introduced to them through the local networks, of course, of the countries, and of course that we are trying to keep the step with all things which are happening in UN. I would like to mention one positive example of how they can be distributed further or communicated. In the beginning of the year, in February, there was it was organized by the Greek local network, Southeast European conference, where experts from many countries were invited, and practically very early in the year, the framework of the guiding principles on human rights were presented there to all the members of the local networks. So this was one of the efforts made in this area. I will try to be as short as possible in order to save the time for the future discussions that can come. Just that I wanted to focus a little bit more on the challenges for integration of the guiding principles in the countries, in the businesses, and in general among all the people. And about what opportunities are giving us these guiding principles on human rights. We may consider the guiding principles primarily as opportunity to learn. They give the businesses as well as the local networks and the public sector, of course, opportunity to understand and further engage with their stakeholders. As referent points, they can be a self-assessment tool for the companies also. Having in mind, of course, that no size fits all, it is necessary that we always take in consideration and respect diversities as historical, cultural, legal, of course, and financial conditions for each case, as we on the Balkans have them much, so as to meet the broader cases and to be easily integrated in realization of these principles. Then about integration, we believe that relevant education of all citizens is necessary from young age. Why is it so? Because we believe that practically they have to be embedded in everyone's culture. Now we are saying for starting the education about the human rights and global compact principles of human rights. Also, in the same time, the education and the training about them needs to be spread through all employees, stakeholders, but primarily to the management and to the top management of the companies, because they are the ones who need to recognize first. Generally, we believe that we need, in order the guiding principles to be adopted and embedded well in the business sector, there need to be developed a culture related to this adoption of human rights. So it should be become a part of our conscience, become part of our everyday behavior, something that we inside of us believe a lot in. So that integration cannot happen in while, in a short term. It is a process. It is a process which needs to be worked. It needs to be supported a lot. It has to happen in a way that it will strengthen both individual and collective level. So promoting and supporting a business model by disseminating best practices and encouraging even imitation or multiplying the best practices, we consider as one of the beneficial ways to be used. Also, we believe that increasing visibility and sharing information about global compact on the local level is necessary in this area. And all the challenges that we need to face, like a lack of experts maybe in the area, or lack of financial resources, lack of CSR practitioners in the companies, within the companies, are some things which need to be approached. So we need more ambassadors of change or human rights consultants inside the companies, both private and public. In this field also, the public sector, we believe, should be involved and give their paradigm and request for all businesses and partners to follow. Also everyone needs to work, both businesses and private sector, and all stakeholders to be engaged, to work in collaborative manner in order the human rights to be embedded in a right way as they are positioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Mr. Rajeev Williams.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman of the session, members of the panel, members of the working group, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here and speak to you on issues which really are focused after the issue of the guiding principles. Or rather, when the process started when John Ruggie visited India. And there was a lot of energy developed, so both as a company representative, as also a member of the Global Compact Network India, I have this onus of taking the agenda forward, which really imposes a lot of challenges and yet a lot of opportunities. That's why we're here to talk about it. And this morning, when Alex mentioned about implementation of the guiding principles is where we want to be. And followed by John Ruggie when he mentioned about the international law, which really need to be enforced now. And that's important because we keep coming out with guidelines unless it has a law for implementation. That's the best way of taking it forward. And Poovan mentioned about make your voice count. And that's what I thought, that in India, soon after the issue of the guiding principles, we came up with the national voluntary guidelines on the social, environmental, and economic responsibilities of business on 11th of July last year, 2011. literally a few days after the guiding principles were endorsed by India also. And that's why this was an improvement on the guidelines that we had come out with, the corporate social responsibility guidelines, the national voluntary guidelines, which essentially has two parts. And of course, we've got the brief description of the principle, and principle number 5 relates to only human rights. And the second thing is, of course, we have the core elements of each principle, and principle number 5 is, as I mentioned, about human rights and business. So we have tried to take this forward, but challenges are there, huge challenges. And it's not only the corporates themselves, because you have to get the buy-in from the top. In my own corporate, the problem was there initially. And ours is a large steel company. Our group company is one of the largest, and our stainless steel is the largest in India. Coming to the point is, once we get the buy-in from the top, then we can take the agenda forward. And that's just what is beginning to happen. In our own company, yes, but in other companies in India also are getting somewhat aligned to it, about which I'll touch upon a little later. So it's not only the large corporates which are having a problem. The major problem is with the MSME sectors, the medium, small, and the micro industries. How do we tackle them? That's the biggest challenge for us. And as a Global Compact Network India, we have about over 120 members signed up, of which some are small and medium, and some are large, some are civil society organizations. But to get them together is very difficult. And then we relate it to our own communities around which our plants have to get the license to operate. And that's human rights element which have to be delved into it. And therefore, I think we need to go into the due diligence process. We need to do an audit, but there was a conversation around the point is, let's not call it an audit. But the idea is impact, because that's the baseline that where we are. I appreciate, of course, the Western world has got advanced much more in issues, but we're not too far behind. We have won the startup. Because apparently, we had been doing this for quite some years, but the approach probably wasn't very structured. And we now, with the guiding principles in place, have an approach to follow and implement. And therefore, recently only, our company has taken on this initiative with Mazars, if I may so say, James, and we hope that that process, at least one of the indicators which are required for the community development, is where we will get to know exactly where we are. We all say that no, there is no problems with human rights, but we have problems with acquisition of land. We have problems when we talk about the environment, when you have so many other issues that are relating to our steel plants and our power plants. So the reflections are that once we get a baseline data in place, I think we can scale up and we can do much more. And for that, what we have undertaken in the Global Compact Network is capacity building. We need to build our own capacities, one, two, capacities of our other companies, and that's a challenge. How do we build the capacities? Training modules, yes. But do we have enough tools in place? Probably yes. But the actual implementation, again, of the training process needs experts to facilitate this process. And here, the Human Rights Subcommittee of the Global Compact Network, of which I am the convener, we have created or formed a CEO forum of large and small companies. 25 have signed up, and that was a big challenge, let me tell you that. But it was a great opportunity when you have competitors, when you have companies like Tatas and Jindals and ArcelorMittal or equivalents are sitting together and talking. When you speak, you learn. When you learn, you share. And that's what I'm bringing right now to you, that hopefully tomorrow's session is going to be delving a little more on this particular CEO forum. And we are having a lot of awareness programs, national conferences. We have the Institute of Corporate Affairs under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs of Government of India, which is taking on this challenge, which is trying to promote the fundamentals of the guiding principle, nurturing the national voluntary guidelines. And I must share with you that the Government of India is now in the process of adopting a company's law bill, an act, which is going to be a company bill which is talking about corporate social responsibility, and one of the main verticals is human rights and business. Now, once that becomes a law, that's aligned to what John Ruggie mentioned this morning. And I think that's important, because that's the only time when corporations say, excuse me, we've just got to do it. And not only do it, but we've got to get it right. And that's a smart way of, I think, achieving whatever we are trying to achieve. And we are grateful to GBI, who has been, Mark has been a great support in this entire team in developing the agenda of trying to raise this kind of awareness and trying to reach out to various parts of not only our corporations, but in our communities. And finally, I would like to only make a mention that, as I've mentioned earlier, the effort is to bring the MSMEs into the fold and educate them, try and see that how they can imbibe upon these principles which have been listed. And let me tell you one thing, that our economy, over 75%, relates to the MSME sector. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's move now from the business sector to civil society organizations, and I'll start with Mr. Mwangonde from Citizens for Justice, Malawi.
Thank you very much. I was about to protest when you went through my CV. There have been some changes to it, but
I hope you don't mean additions.
no. But yeah, I'm humbled to be here to share some practical experiences on the ground, what's happening in Malawi. But also I think I will speak a bit of not just for Malawi, but I think the situation in Malawi is very symptomatic of what is happening in the SADC region. What I want to do is I want to talk about how the lack of awareness for the GPs, the lack of the political will for the industry, for NGOs, and for government, and then the voluntary nature of the GPs, and the lack of the mechanisms for the GPs, how these challenges affect and the realization of socioeconomic rights for people in different countries, for example, in Malawi. But I want to start with a quote, and it says, the Australians and the Canadians have become overly sophisticated in their environmental and social concerns over uranium mining. The future is in Africa. This is a quote from a CEO of a mining company from Australia. I'm not going to mention his name. But the reason I'm quoting this is because I want to link these challenges to countries that have weak governance. It's a new audience, but also it's an audience that has governance challenges. When you put these two things together, it's a situation. And adding on to that is that when you look at the SADC region, a grouping of mining companies that sat at a meeting in Lusaka 2 years ago, they said that Zambia, Tanzania, and Malawi were preferred investments destinations because these countries have vibrant mining sectors with liberal mining legislation and codes, which is conducive to international investment. So at this meeting, even Zimbabwe fared better at this conference than South Africa. But when we talk about South Africa and Zimbabwe, South Africa is more advanced in terms of mining. They have stringent mining codes. Zimbabwe is a bit on the lower side. But in this case, it fared better. So, like again, why I'm saying this is because we're talking about a new audience which has challenges in terms of rule of law and good governance. And when it comes to Malawi, in terms of awareness of the GPs, a lot of government officials are not aware of what the GPs are. And then you look at the industry players. These are local companies, SMEs, which is it's a very big discussion. It's a very big concern for a lot of people. They don't know what the GPs are. You look at CSOs. A lot of NGOs don't understand what GPs are. And then the notion of human rights institutions. I've met some colleagues here from other parts of Africa that are representing the national human rights institutions, but there's no one from Malawi. And I sat a couple of weeks and months trying to engage the national human rights institution in Malawi to say, there's this meeting happening, can you attend? Are you aware of this? And they said, sorry, Renford, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the resources, and the GPs don't feature anywhere in our agenda. And then, so before you start talking about the GPs, you got to start thinking about awareness. How do you bring awareness to different stakeholders in your own country for them to be able to use them, but also not for communities to be able to access them and be able to enjoy them. And then there is political will for the industry and government officials, but also NGOs. Some junior industry players, they don't strongly believe that they should sit down with NGOs, and they should sit down with government to be able to talk about the GPs. Let alone if you try to approach them, they don't want to listen. That's one side. On the flip side, you have a number of NGOs that don't engage with industry players. They said it doesn't matter what we do. If we engage with the industry, they don't listen. It's very cosmetic. It's not very meaningful. We're not going to waste our time engaging the industry. So we'd rather go out on the other side, stand on the platform, bash, bash, bash. The story goes on. And then there's this lack of domestication of international instruments. It's a different thing for a country to go at the international level, adopt an instrument. It's a different thing for that country to be able to go back in their own domestic national jurisdictions, to be able to adopt them so that the citizens of that particular country can be able to access and enjoy those things. Then also the lack of mechanisms. I'll make reference to GP1 and GP3. The role of the states to be able to prevent, investigate, punish, and provide redress for human rights violations. And in a country where there are no mechanisms at the national level, in terms of the primary legal laws that can enforce something, there's a gap. On the flip side, there's a situation where the government, much as they have ratified that instrument at the international level, they can't domesticate it. And then I'll give you an example of a mining company now in my country that is about to mine something, and then they are relocating 18,000 people. This is a lot of people. What they've done is they've subcontracted the resettlement to the government. So a local district assembly has gotten money from the mining company, given to these few people, but relocating them, they have forgotten to relocate the graveyard. And people are saying, you have moved us from our land. What about our graveyard? The mining company says, sorry, we gave the money to the government. The government is supposed to help you relocate your graveyards. And then the government says, no, we've been given little money from the mining company, and we can't afford to relocate your graveyard. So you have two situations here. One is you have a government who is not aware of the GPs. Two, there are no mechanisms. Three, is a system where literally the mining company has failed to exercise due diligence. So in a country where weak governance it does exist, where there's no rule of law, it's a double sword for communities because they don't know where to go. So in the absence of lack of mechanisms, literally they're left standing, and this is a legacy for people that have always lived on that land, they have left their graveyard behind. The story goes on. And then the voluntary nature of the GPs. Exactly what I just said now. You have a system where the government has failed to exercise, the industry has failed to exercise due diligence, and the government has no mechanisms. So who is there to police the government and the industry to make sure that they're doing the right things, to make sure that there's some sort of adherence to the GPs? So it's a challenge in the absence of no legal mandate, no obligation for the government, but also for the industry to be able to make sure they're doing the right thing. But what are the opportunities? I just can't sit here and talk about this and that, but also it's a good thing to look at what are the opportunities that we see as NGOs. I think the coming of this particular meeting, the sitting together in this forum, is a very good opportunity where we can sit together. We have to be able to try and build the trust for NGOs, for industry players, and for governments to be able to start working together, to be able to listen to each other. And it's not working like that. It's not working like that in countries like Malawi, but also countries like Zambia and Tanzania. I work with colleagues in these countries. It's a very big challenge to sit on the same table with the government and the industry. And then also there has not been such a consensus about the GPs at the international level. I think, so this is a good starting, and we strongly believe that different countries that are here, I was sitting in the forum where I'm hearing about different countries and they're engaging, countries in the global south about the role of national human rights institutions. We hopefully believe that they'll get to our country, they'll be able to engage our countries for them to be able to start thinking about the GPs and they're able to implement them at the national level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The last speaker is Mr. Lee Cheng.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Sen. Good afternoon, everybody. And when Mr. Senna introduce my organization. They have some explanation. Actually, 11 years ago, when I tried to form my organization, I tried to name it to focus on labor rights or migrant work. But you know, it's China. There is what the biggest, largest, and longest ruling party. The party it represents the work class. So far in China, there is no any independent organization named labor rights or human rights. Yeah, the China, maybe you know, just shift the top leadership. The change is ongoing due to the internet and microblog platform, while allowed significant degree of access to information resulting in significant rates of change of the Chinese society, which also contribute to expanding citizen consciousness of their rights. However, and human rights is still a sensitive word in China. And there is, I think, clear window of change and opportunity to promote human rights. I think that it's corporate social responsibility, say CSR. I think CSR is an innovative approach to balance between the business profit and the fundamental work rights in China. And its principle that have been widely accepted and practiced in the international community. And I think in China, the CSR also have been gained momentum. And since 2005, that there is more and more company, including Chinese state-owned company and private company, and have commitment to comply with the principle of CSR. By this year, there is more than 240 Chinese enterprises have signed the UN Global Compact. According my incomplete calculation, there is more than 600 companies issued their CSR report in last year. But most Chinese companies, when they say the CSR is very different to the community, most of them is focused on the environmental and clear production, charity, donation, or engage local community. In this year, Global Compact Chinese Local Network award 17 best practice the case project. I find this, and 5 projects are environmental protection, and 6 projects is engage with local community. 3 projects are for supporting education in poor area. Now any project is focused on labor or human rights. So I think in China, when we talk the labor rights or human rights, we always have to cover by many other language. So I think what is the right language and right way to promote human rights in China? I think Global Compact can do more, but not only focus on this area. And I think Global Compact, the biggest content is labor rights and human rights. But how to do that? This morning, Professor Jean-Luc mentioned capacity building. I think it's very important because in China, when we talk the language of the CSR or business and human rights or global compact, there's many big confuse. How to narrow the gap is very important. It's to bottom up, to let the people, especially the worker, can have a power to involve in the process to promote the CSR, promote the business and human rights. And you know, China, there is the biggest, so many the internal migrant work here. Many migrant workers, they work in the biggest manufacturing. This manufacturer produce everything. You know, my city produce 1/3 of the iPad, iPhone in the world. But you know, many cases about the violation of labor law. So I think, and in China, most international organizations, especially just like including Global Compact and the United Nations or the Western government, they only works with government or some government organization. This actually, they know your language, but they don't want to do that, especially don't turn the language from the CSR to human rights. I think this is the core point. How to do that? We need to work together in the future. Thank you.
Okay, so we've had 5 presentations, and we will listen to the respondent. But before giving the floor to the respondent, I would just like to summarize what I've heard from the different presentations so that we can structure the debate. We've heard from our colleague from Brazil 3 issues related to context, to the cultural context, to the social context, and to the historical context. The cultural context is that for the guiding principles to be disseminated and adhered to, we need to translate them into as many languages as possible. So that's, I think, the first challenge that many countries will encounter, including in Macedonia or in India, in South Africa, etc. But from Geneva or from New York or Paris, we tend to think that the world speaks only 2 languages, which is English and French. We forget that, you know, if you want to reach out to the Chinese business community, you need to translate these documents in Chinese. So it seems to me that that's the first challenge that goes back to the UN, that it needs to go beyond the 6 official languages. And if we want to take this message to the business community and all the stakeholders around the world, we should really make an effort to put resources for translation into as many languages as possible. The second one is the social context. Brazil is a country that has inherited from centuries of structural discrimination against the blacks, against the Indians, against the women, etc. And in a context like this, when companies are putting in place their recruitment policies, what you are telling us is that it is not just enough anymore to recruit the best candidates, but we have to take into account the legacy of this discrimination and put in place policies that will ensure that, so here we go beyond respecting human rights, we move to supporting human rights by developing these kinds of policies. And the third one, which is very interesting, is the historical context. You say that your government has put in place now a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to look at the excesses of the military dictatorship. But we know that all dictatorships have partners in the business community. So will this Truth and Reconciliation Commission look into the role of Brazilian business or multinational corporation in Brazil during the time of the dictatorship in the commission of major human rights violations in order to draw lessons for the future so that business can learn from its past mistakes in preparing for the future. From Macedonia, we've heard again the question of respect of the diversity of context, legal context, historical context, cultural context, social context, that you find in all the Balkan countries. Even though they were together, they were very different from one another. And your challenge is how you implement these international principles when you lack expertise, when you lack financial resources, but you think that the best way to do it is through the exchange of best practices. That's more practical, and it allows companies to solve actual concrete problems and use the principles as a guide in order to address those concrete issues. India, an interesting story for India, because you're telling us that in India actually you've been practicing corporate social responsibility for a long time without knowing that you were practicing it. And now that you have these guiding principles, you have gone even further in developing national voluntary guidelines, and that you may even, or that you will develop a law to implement it. So the question, I guess, to the audience is, should all countries follow the same path and develop laws to assist in the implementation of the guiding principles? I know that in some countries it may pose a problem. But again, here you have raised an interesting point, that is, we need to bring to the companies when they are looking at human rights, it's not just the human rights of the workers. You mentioned land acquisition and the practices in land acquisition, confiscation, that human rights is also something that should inform these practices in India. NGOs, Malawi, lack of awareness among stakeholders. The industry players are not interested. They don't want any constraint to the work that they are doing in Africa, and that's why they are going to Africa. The NGOs don't want to engage into any dialogue with the villains. And for governments, it's not a priority because they don't want anything that could endanger investment. So as a result, there is no mechanism, there is no due diligence, there is no accountability. But I hope that in the discussion you will give us some message of hope of what people like you are doing to change this. And in China, CSR could be an opportunity to promote human rights and workers' rights, but at the moment, CSR is just about environment, community engagement, and philanthropy. So therefore, how do you promote human rights as part of the package? And your suggestion is that we should stop talking just to governments, but address also civil society groups and directly business, like we do in the Global Compact. So we should try maybe to see if we can learn from India and get you to do human rights without saying it, get you to protect the communities and the rights of the workers without using the H word, right? Okay, so let's move to the respondent, Gwendolyn from our Global Compact local network in Germany, and Catherine from the Global Business Initiative, and Margaret is still here. Margaret, okay. No, we don't have addition. Yes, we have a chair. We have a chair, Margaret. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you
You will
very.
upset the gender balance, but for once. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the very interesting inputs that we just heard. And I think the goal of the session was to identify also similarities between what is happening in your countries, but also what is happening in our countries, like Germany. And I found some very interesting similarities in the things that you were saying between our national contexts and your context. For example, that the awareness about human rights is a lot about issues like labor, and not so much about other human rights issues like you mentioned, children and the other thing is the lack of awareness on the guiding principles and human rights in general, what it means, what there is. Of course, there is some more implementation, but there is a lack of awareness for sure, and the spreading of the guiding principles around society, and I like the idea of writing a simpler version of the guiding principles, because I think I see this also for the German context, that there is a lack of understanding what the principles mean for everyday life and businesses. And the way I see it, we are dealing in the network with two different levels of companies. I mean, Germany has many multinational companies that are also have been dealing with human rights issues for quite a while, and have undergone training and are reporting about their human rights programs. So we are working with them, but the guiding principles, I think, are mostly posing a problem for us, or the implementation is a challenge with regard to SMEs and non-stock market listed companies, because I think the reason why they should even care about human rights is much harder to identify with them. There's not so much external pressure on why they should deal with human rights. And I was told to tell a little bit about what we are doing in Germany, and this is, like I said, very much focused on the national context and especially on SMEs and non-stock market listed companies, but also the multinational companies in our network. And what we have done is basically develop a kind of working program on human rights that is basically consisting of multi-stakeholder dialogue, as I think is the most advantage of global compact local networks, that they can promote multi-stakeholder dialogue and be a space to talk about issues in a sort of trusted atmosphere. But we have also developed a group coaching. So it's a coaching program with 12 to 15 companies in every session, learning about human rights in a closed atmosphere, in a closed session, and being able to ask questions. What does human rights actually mean for us? What can I do about it? Where do I have an impact? And from this coaching, we have founded a working group, a peer learning working group, where these alumni of the coaching are exchanging ideas in a closed environment yet again. And finally, and this is also something that was mentioned by the colleague from Macedonia, you said something, the guiding principles as a self-assessment tool. And what we did together with our partner 2050 is actually making some kind of self-assessment tool out of the guiding principles. So it's an online tool that is freely accessible for everyone, and it's based on the guiding principles. And we are looking forward to also collaborate with more local networks to make this tool more available to others. But to sum it up, I'm very, very excited to hear that we are facing similar challenges and that we have found similar solutions, but also new solutions that are new to me, and that I think we should exchange even more on. Thank you.